Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 18th issue of Chebacco Chats. We are really happy to have with us today Jane Bianco, who is curator at the Farnsworth Art Museum in Rockland, Maine. Since 2008, Jane has researched and organized painting, photography, drawings and print, textiles, architectural and other art historical exhibitions, and written accompanying catalogs, including the one we're talking about today, Eliot Porter, All the Wild Places. She published that in 2020. Jane holds a bachelor's in fine arts and graphic design from Boston University and a master's in art history with a concentration in material culture from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Jane, welcome to Chebacco Chats.
Thank you. Thank you. I will just launch in. This is the first time, everyone, that I've done a Zoom, a PowerPoint via Zoom. So forgive me, my mouse is very sensitive if it gets away from me.
I'm sure you have a very understanding audience, Jane. Everybody gets it.
I do hope so. And thank you very much for joining the chat today. We do have an Eliot Porter show up at the Farnsworth, and as you may know, the Farnsworth is open to reservations on a timed basis. So you can, if you are interested, see the Porter show before the end of the year, or it is going to extend through the end of the year. And I would just say that there's nothing like standing face to face with a piece of artwork. So though I do hope the images come through on this presentation, I think seeing the work in front of you is even better. Eliot Porter was 1901, 1990. He's known for his role in establishing color photography as an important art form. That may not sound like anything much to us. We're all so used to color photography, but he was an early pioneer in the use of color photography. He's known particularly and all throughout his life for his bird photographs and for his color photographs that span the globe and reveal what I say are nature's wondrous configurations of layer and pattern. His photography was interwoven with his approach as a naturalist as he traveled and throughout the world between New England and the Southwest, where he lived in New England in the summer, Southwest the rest of the year as he was an adult, the Baja Peninsula to Iceland, China, Antarctica, the Galapagos Islands, and to Africa, focusing his lens increasingly on nature's details within a changing landscape. It was his imagery as well as his fabulous writing, which he engaged in both, first published in a series of Sierra Club books in the 60s that helped launch global interest in the conservation movement. But he stated that he never would have been a good photographer had he gone out to photograph solely for a cause. Rather, I believe his images are reflections of his curiosity and his pure delight in the beauty of the places where he found himself. In 1939, he gave up a burgeoning career, a successful career as a researcher in microbiology and biochemistry at Harvard and a teacher to turn full-time to artistic photography, spurred on by a successful one-man exhibition of his work at the Alfred Stieglitz Renowned and American Place Gallery. This is 1939, black and white photographs. Again, he initially concentrated on photographing birds close up, And in the show, we have marvelous home movies through the graciousness of David Porter and the Northeast to Start Film Archive. These are silent films, but you can see in the exhibition Eliot Porter setting up all his equipment in various 3 different short excerpts. Quite interesting. However, when his highly regarded bird photographs done in the 30s were refused for publication because the publishers felt that the birds could not be distinguished enough in black and white, their plumage, that's what prompted him to go to explore color film. And I thought I'd start with a lovely color photograph of a place you may know. Being in the audience, I'm assuming there are a number of you from MDI, and you may recognize this as Bass Harbor, an estuary in Bass Harbor, formerly known as McKinley, if I have that right. And Eliot Porter's title is Tidal Marsh McKinley, done in 1965. And because I don't know MDI as well as you do, I needed to know where this was. I found an old postcard here, easily online. And because of the outline of the mountains in the background, which Tim has given me the names of them and I promptly forgot them, you can see the parallel between Porter's 1965 photograph and this postcard, which may have been done in the 30s, I'm guessing. Ruth and James Porter, the parents of Eliot Porter, had 5 children: Nancy, Eliot, Edward, Fairfield, and John, born in that order. And you see Eliot on the far left and his brother Fairfield Porter, the painter, next to him. Eliot and Fairfield were very close. And later in life, the painter admitted to his brother that his own work had been influenced by his photography, an acknowledgement that Eliot Porter deeply treasured. As they were growing up, the 5 Porter children enjoyed private tutors, fine schools, reading concerts, museums, and extensive travels from their home near Chicago. The family eventually purchased Great Spruce Head Island in Penobscot Bay, just off the coast of the familiar area to all of us of Maine. Whoops, that's the mouse being sensitive. Okay. So then I thought it would be interesting to see the distance between Bass Harbor and Great Spruce Head Island. Great Spruce Head Island on the left in the little square, as you can see, it's not too far from North Haven and Islesboro. And all the Porters were avid boaters. In fact, Stephen Porter, this well-known sculptor, Eliot Porter's son, has built boats. And I suspect that Eliot Porter boated out to, and here I'll use the cursor if it shows up, I'm not sure. I believe he boated from Great Spruce Head Island around Deer Isle and Stonington, which he was an area which he was very familiar with, shot a lot of photographs there, and made his way up to MDI through Bass Harbor by boat, I suspect. These photographs are taken by me out on Great Spruce Head Island last autumn when I was honored to be able to pay a visit there. The inside of the great house is a setting that some of you may be familiar with through Fairfield Porter's paintings. And as I gazed out the window from the dining room at some point, this fabulous 4-masted, is it, schooner sailed by, It's a very magical place. I can understand why the family went year after year to Great Spruce Head Island and how it influenced the brothers. And that includes John Porter as well, whose films you can see in the exhibition. Reached only by boat and crisscrossed by footpaths made by their father, the island, this magical place, was a place of woodlands, fields, rocky shorelands, and homes for birds. Features that had a profound effect on all the Porter children and on the artistic visions in particular of both Eliot and Fairfield Porter. So you see, of course, Eliot Porter photograph on the left, excuse me, and Fairfield Porter painting on the right, both in the Farnsworth collection. And both showing the shoreline. And there's a close-up of our picture that is kind of the title piece for the catalog and the show. And what Eliot Porter said about the island was that our lives there, my brothers and sisters and mine, were from the very first determined by the sea. High tide was the time to swim, and low tide the time to explore the shore. And their father was an avid naturalist himself and instilled in all of his children a great appreciation and curiosity about the natural world. So here is Eliot Porter as a young man setting up his tripod in order to photograph birds in their natural settings, usually nesting birds on Great Spruce Head Island. Whoops. Whoa. Okay. I don't know how to get this to go back.
Oh, I think maybe, Jane, I think maybe you press the play button so that it's running automatically. And if you...
you know, I got this really sensitive. Okay. There he is in the Southwest. He had a home as an adult where he raised his own family in Tesuque, outside of Santa Fe. The best of two worlds, right? Maine and New Mexico. So here I'm showing how beautiful his black and white photographs were of birds. And here his color photography as it emerged with bird photography. And what's interesting to me in both of these are the compositions, and particularly in the color picture. You see how the birds are nestled in their haven of a nest between the pattern that the fur makes all around them. It couldn't be a better painting. This is the shed, now a little cottage on the island, also my photograph, where Eliot Porter produced his printed dye transfer color prints. And I can read to you something I don't understand very well because I haven't done it myself or not, or perhaps we can leave it to the question and answer period about the masks and the dye transfer process. But this is where he worked. And Stephen Porter, again, his son, the sculptor, also observed his father doing the dye transfer process. And he thought it was quite amazing as the colors emerged. The Amon Carter Museum in Fort Worth, Texas houses the bulk of Eliot Porter's work and his archives, masses of photographs and materials. 25,000 transparencies and over 7,000 dye transfer prints are housed at the Amon Carter Museum. It's a wonderful resource for researchers and those who just appreciate his photographs. And you can go online, find out a lot about Eliot Porter at the Amon Carter Museum archives. This is a I'm going to try not to talk too much because I think the photographs speak for themselves. This was a gift from Stephen Porter and his wife Marcia to the Farnsworth, Great Spruce Head Island, looking down. Though in the scenes of woodlands on his main island, Eliot Porter's photographs imply permanence. These places have been altered over time. And on the island, he noticed a diminishing bird population. And as well, the stands of trees have been windswept and fallen and changed over the years. This very, very famous photograph, of which the Farnsworth has a print, was taken by Eliot Porter on at a 4x5 inch format. And it was blown up by Ansel Adams to a 5-foot high print. This is the front and center beginning of our show at the Farnsworth. In 1972, Eliot Porter was preparing for a retrospective exhibition of his work at the University of New Mexico in Art Museum in Albuquerque. And he asked Ansel Adams, whom he knew, if he would enlarge his print to monumental scale. A feeling that perhaps Ansel Adams was the only photographer in America with the technical ability to do this sort of thing. Adams had been making large-scale prints and photomurals in the late 1930s during the WPA era for various projects relating to his work for the Department of the Interior. So he was well equipped to do this. And he did make 5 monumental scale black and white prints from the Eliot Porter negative. However, despite their lifelong friendship and common interests in conservation and photography, Ansel Adams maintained an aversion to color photography. And as Eliot Porter quoted in his autobiography, Adams felt it was too literal to be an art form. Too much information. Eliot's childhood spent exploring Great Spruce Head Island and other nearby islands, as you may recall from the map, in Penobscot Bay, first inspired him to seek out other unspoiled places as an adult. As his son Stephen has noted, the island was one of the great influences of his life. How could it not have been? Most of us may know his photographs through a series of coffee table-sized books, first published by the Sierra Club in the 60s, and over the decades by other publishers. During his lifetime and beyond, there are more than 30 books published with the writings, the fabulous writing, as well as the fabulous photographs of Eliot Porter. And these are just a sampling. Porter was reading the books and journals of Henry David Thoreau in the 30s. And he was marking passages that he felt related to his photography. He was developing an emotional and an aesthetic feeling for his work, even as he was consumed with the technicalities. He amassed a series of photographs and in 1959 exhibited some of the pairings of Thoreau, quotes from Thoreau, as well as with his images at the George Eastman House in Rochester, New York. At that time, his work came to the attention of conservationist David Brower, director of the Sierra Club. And 2 years later, Brower had raised the funds to publish a book that Eliot Porter had envisioned. In Wildness is the Preservation of the World became the first of his nearly 30 books published over his lifetime. This book, I consider it a classic, marked a turning point in the acceptance of fine art color photography, and it has personally had a profound effect on my own creative vision. And here, if you can see a bit of the quote from which the title was extracted, from Thoreau's essay on walking. In Wildness was published soon after Rachel Carson's revelations in her book Silent Spring, published just a few months before this one, of the harm wrought by dependence upon pesticides, another author related to Maine. In the preface to this book, Eliot Porter wrote that through his photographs, I hope to be able to complement in feeling and spirit Thoreau's thinking 100 years ago, and to show the peril we face even more today by our faster destruction of life, not our own. On view in the Farnsworth exhibition are 3 portfolios from our collection in their entirety. Over his lifetime, Eliot Porter put together 12 or more portfolios with various publishers. And it's wonderful to see these photographs. Thanks to the Friends of the Farnsworth collection, a group established to provide funds for the museum to publish works of American art with an emphasis on artists who've lived and worked in Maine, we were able to acquire these 3 portfolios. And so I'll give you a bit of a taste of some of the images from the portfolios, and hopefully not talking too much here. This is near Great Barrington, Massachusetts, a place I know very well. Who has not walked through a pathway in Maine woods similar to this one? It is Path in the Woods, Great Spruce Head Island. 1981. Hawkweed in the Meadow, Great Spruce Head Island. 1968. Maple Leaves and Pine Needles, Tamworth, New Hampshire, 1956. And again, keep in mind, Eliot Porter not only photographed these, but he did his own color prints. Glen Canyon is a special case. It was another issue that was taken up by the Sierra Club. During the 1950s, plans were made to harness water from the upper Colorado River for irrigation projects for ranchers in Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming, and for dams to provide water storage and release to downstream to Arizona, California, and Nevada. While some of these dam projects were dropped, Glen Canyon Dam was not. So in collaboration with the Sierra Club, Porter compiled his photographs taken along the Colorado River as the place no one knew. And copies of the book were sent to President Lyndon Johnson and his Secretary of the Interior, Stuart Udall, at the time, as well as every member of Congress, with a plea not to implement the Glen Canyon Dam. However, of course, it was. And the damming created Lake Powell, which began filling in 1963 and completed in 1980. At capacity storage, the lake has 26 million acre-feet of water. This is Escalante River Outwash, Glen Canyon, 1962. And I think as you see these photographs, you begin to see the abstract nature of his compositions. I think this is worth reading. because it speaks to his feeling for, as a scientist, as a naturalist, and as an artist. Porter eventually made 11 raft trips on the Colorado River and conveyed his first reactions to the beauty of the area in this quote. I hope I've given you enough time to read it. Some of these pictures actually, well, they make me gasp because of the vivid color and the color, the forms and the color, just because of the color and the forms, the juxtaposition, the arrangement of forms, and it's all natural. This is the San Juan, along the San Juan River in Utah in 1962. Reflections in a pool, Indian Creek, Escalante River, Utah. He worked with a 2¼ camera while rafting, which is his means of transport along the Colorado, and a 4x5" camera on land. He portrayed the canyon's rock faces, water, and plants in over 1,000 images captured during 11 trips to the area. He visited twice in 62, 63, 64, 65, 68, and then in 1971, altogether 11 trips. And in 2 rafting trips in 1961, painter Georgia O'Keeffe accompanied him. She sketched while he photographed. And he wrote, "I remember how she liked looking up out of slot canyons and caves at holes in the sky." So she was seeing the abstract nature along the way as well. And this is the edge, the river's edge along the Glen Canyon Courseway. Water slide taken from above. It's hard to gauge the scale of this. I do believe his photographs exceeded their documentary value in revealing the canyon's forms and surfaces of abstract patterns and of water, rock, and light intermixed. Certain passages was published in 1989, the portfolio of images. And I do believe it's a kind of, towards the end of his life, it's a kind of summing up of places he loved as a photographer during his life. And something he wrote as a preface to this book, I feel is very important. His emphasis of love for his subject matter above the medium of photography. So I think he felt that way about the birds, and I think he felt that way about the greater world. Foxtail grass along the Colorado River, 1976. 1967, Grand Canyon. And what I notice about these 2 photographs juxtaposed, just forgetting about their subject matter, is again the sort of emphasis on the curves and the edges of things. Water-streaked wall, Lake Powell, after the water had risen, 1965, or as it was rising, excuse me. And then juxtaposed from the same portfolio with aspens taken in 1959, the emphasis on the vertical patterns of tree trunks and of streaks in a canyon. And then bracken and hawkweed, and his image of the apple tree shown at the very beginning of this presentation, which I I think it's a sort of a visual interplay of patterns and textures, which I find rather fascinating. The subtle pattern on pattern between the apples against the leaves and the ferns against the bracken in the field. And here, from the same portfolio, Gray's Arch and birch tree, Gray's Arch, Kentucky, and birch trees in the Adirondacks. The more you, or at first, for me anyway, it was very hard for me to distinguish on the left in Gray's Arch which trees were in the foreground and which were in the background. And somehow the background came towards the foreground. The images, some of the images he takes play with that. They're sort of disorienting. Again, I mentioned it's hard to tell scale, but sometimes it's hard to tell what's what. And I think that's part of the fascination once you're drawn into his photographs. It's not just the obvious details, but it's what it does not only to your eyes, but to your psyche. His photographs are really multi-layered. And this one, I can imagine that the tree is trying to escape from the woods around it. It's just bursting in color and standing out from all the rest. All kinds of analogies you can make there. And then I do believe that his Glen Canyon photographs, one on the right, for example, played a part in inspiring his travels to really far-flung realms, including Antarctica. As a scientist and as an artist both, he knew the underlying forces that created what he was looking at. He understood cellular and crystalline networks, surface tensions, chemical, mechanical, and evolutionary changes causing structural and optical nuances. Not only did he observe this, but he played with this in his aesthetic compositions. His photography emphasized the beauty of the complex. And here, this one, so hard to tell. What is the foreground? What is the background? Is that an ocean in between? No, it's a hillside of snow. Those are layers and layers of distance that we're looking at, snow-covered hills and mountains with the far distant smokiness on the mountains in the far, far distance. And here, the colors just sort of relegated to blue and yellow. It's just amazing. And he wrote about 2 trips to Antarctica. They're riveting books. Roughly twice the size of Australia, the Antarctica is cold, windy, and dry. The average temperature ranges from 14 to 76 degrees Fahrenheit. I didn't know it got that hot. But more recently, 80% of the glaciers along the West Coast have retreated in the last 50 years, with most of these showing an accelerated retreat or melt in the last dozen years. And it was between the summer time, between December and February, that he took these photographs of Antarctica. This is a photograph taken in February this year. Satellite images, Landsat 8 photos on the northern tip of the Antarctica Peninsula that stretches towards South America. 2 days after the first photo was taken, the area hit 65 degrees Fahrenheit pretty early in the year. And that temperature coincidentally matched the day's temperature in Los Angeles. This is Antarctica. NASA said the warm spell caused widespread melting on nearby glaciers. And NASA expanded. Such persistent warmth was not typical until the 21st century in Antarctica, and it has become more common as the years go by. The Antarctic Peninsula at the northwestern tip near South America is one of the fastest warming areas of the world. So last fall, when I was visiting Great Spruce Head Island, where the family made their home each summer since 1912, the journal Science was also publishing concurrently the findings of a 50-year study of bird species, 529 bird species by 7 international institutions, concluding that on the American continent, the bird population has diminished by an unprecedented scale since Eliot Porter was making his bird photographs. But even in his lifetime, until he died, from 1901 until 1990, he was noticing the diminishing singing bird population just on Great Spruce Head Island. So here he is, a young man with his large format camera. And just to sum up, he was a doctor, he was a researcher. He started out as a scientist. His father instilled in him an appreciation for the natural world, and in that sense, he was a naturalist. The aesthetic factors entered into his photography once he went into color. And in both cases, I believe, his bird photographs and his landscape photographs were because of his love of the world around him, and that these things in this world inspired his own photographic images, his own photographic documents of discovery. Thank you.
Jane, that was magnificent. I am just in awe of the images you showed us, and his creative drive and his expertise. It's just fascinating. We've fielded lots of questions. I want to welcome our viewers from the world of the Farnsworth Art Museum. I think there's many people perhaps who are more strongly connected with the Farnsworth rather than the Mount Desert Island Historical Society, but we're very glad you're here. And we don't have time for all the questions, but there's one or two that really strike me. And one is, what was the most rewarding part of working on the Porter show?
I would say it was getting to know members of the Porter family and realizing the sort of the legacy within that family and that had been passed down from, now it would be their grandfather to a generation now in their 70s, and then their children and their children. Of reverence for Great Spruce Head Island and for this part of Maine. That's really what had the most impact on me most recently. Further into the past, when I spoke about in wildness is the preservation of the world, or having an impact on me, it was because after seeing that book as a teenager, on my own rambles to the woods, I started to see, if this doesn't sound too presumptuous, I started to see the world through Eliot Porter's eyes, and that has never left me. One of the things I do on walks is look down, partly so I don't trip, but also because the patterns of what lies beneath us are so fascinating. Those microcosms are, to me, some of the most beautiful scenes that I'll ever see. And I think it was because Eliot Porter recognized those himself. It was the details of nature that he brought to the fore mainly through his books, because they were popularized and people like me could just look at them growing up. Yeah.
Well, Unfortunately, we're out of time. We'd field more questions, but let's finish, Jane, with telling our viewers where they can learn more.
Oh, you must seek out his books. Just Google Eliot Porter. His writing is magnificent, his photographs even better. But come to the Farnsworth. You can come on reserved and timed tickets to see the show throughout the end of the year. As I said in the beginning, there's nothing like standing in front of an Eliot Porter photograph, and these are all large format, 16 by 20 for the most part. And then the Ansel Adams, the 5-foot high, black and white, you feel as though you're standing in the trees.
Well, thank you, Jane. This was just a wonderful presentation. I'm so glad that we were connected so that we could present this to a new audience. And I want to invite everyone back for another issue of Chebacco Chats next Thursday at 4:30. The executive director of the Mount Desert Island Historical Society, Rainey Bench, will interview Carolyn Repkevian, the executive director of the Bar Harbor Historical Society, and they'll talk leader to leader about some of the wondrous objects and Carolyn's favorites at the Bar Harbor Historical Society. So I hope you can join us again, either on this Zoom connection. The link is the same every week, or you can connect with us through Facebook Live. Once again, thank you all for joining us, and especially to you, Jane. It was a real pleasure to work with you this week and to see this presentation. Thanks.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Bye-bye.